We're going to talk about the three wheels of Dharma and the other connections you can understand as a result of meditating on these three things. But first, we want you to understand that all the ancient teachings come from a mythological base. And according to Joseph Campbell, there are four main reasons why mythology has such an impact on us. And the aspects of them that make it a living mythology are called the mystical, cosmological, the sociological, and the pedagogical. And the mystical, of course, has to do first with the fact that good mythology helps you confront the mystery of existence. Where is it all from? Where is it all going? What's it all about? Nobody really knows. And so that's the first thing. It puts you in accord with saying yes to the ultimate inanswerability of what it's all about. And the next thing a good mythology does is the cosmological perspective. It gives you the most up-to-date understanding, scientifically speaking, of what here is all about. Where did it come from? And what's our relationship to it? Got to remember, in the ancient techniques, science and religion were one and the same. We've separated church and state, so we have a very different view. But nonetheless, in the ancient world, the cosmology that taught you your connection to the whole, to cosmos, which meant order. Then the sociological connection is each mythology bound the people to the same symbol and sign system, and it usually had a lot to do with the landmass where they lived, because that was their view of reality. What was the ocean, the forest, the river, the mountain, the desert, and so forth. And then the most important aspect is the pedagogical. How did it train each individual to face the vicissitudes of life? How did it give them the wisdom to know what to do in the situations that were to be demanded of them? And that's the four basic understandings of mythology. Now, with that as a basis, the Dharma is a word that comes from Sanskrit, but very often it's connected to Buddhism, where we discuss the three jewels of Buddhism, and they call it the three refuges. And like to be a refugee is like a person who has no place where they could call their home. Just like in Christianity, when Jesus says, the birds have nests and the foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So they say, I take refuge in the Buddha, which is not just the teacher, but it's the awakened qualities of the human being. I take refuge in the Dharma, which is the teaching, which means the way things are and how you are able to align yourself with what it is that's happening. And then the Sangha, the community of believers, the people who are working on themselves just like you are. And so it's not that it couldn't be taught without the Buddha. It's just that he's the one who seemed to popularize it in historical terminology for us. But these three are really inseparable, and they always have been. Now, one of the things you learn from studying the Dharma is the Dharma doesn't suffer in comparison to any teaching. If you've ever listened to the Abhidharma or one of the teachers explain the Abhidharma or read it, the Buddhist psychology, it is so airtight, it is so fantastic that you can converse with anybody and hold your head high. It doesn't suffer in comparison to any teaching. In fact, it probably has many things that other teachings lack. Now, the three wheels of the Dharma are morality, concentration, and wisdom. And one of the things that we think of is when we start to practice, there has to be some wisdom already in you, otherwise you wouldn't be turning to the teaching. And one of the first things that the wisdom insight gives you is the realization of how flawed one is, how many errors, mistakes, vices one has, how many things live in the shadow. And it's really unnerving to discover that. However, once you see what needs to be done, then you have to make a one-pointed effort. You have to focus and concentrate on willingness to change your habits. And usually it starts off with the morality, but then it becomes just a way of focusing your mind completely. And once you focus and you get really, really sharp, what happens is you see. And when you see and you get more insight, again, you realize how off you are. And the more you realize how off you are, the more you start working on yourself. And when you start working on yourself, that means you have to concentrate on it. And the more you concentrate on it, called ekagrata, one-pointedness, the more you see. The more you see, the more you realize where you have to work on yourself. The more you work on yourself, the more you have to concentrate to do that. and so forth, and those three wheels work together. And if one of them gets enhanced, the other two get augmented. If one of them gets decreased or neglected, the other two become less. Now, one of the things that we do in our attempt to move this along in our life is we have to heal ourselves from old wounds. And just like the life of Pi, the important thing is to tell a better story. Tell a better story. I always say, in public, say the most positive thing, and then find a sacred space or 12-step program where you can share with other people so you're not in denial about what's going on with you. Now, the story of the king and the corpse is an old one, and basically has to do with learning what it is to sacrifice yourself. This king has to go to a charnel ground and take a hangman off the gallows and bring it to a place where he's going to perform a sacrifice with a necromancer, but he doesn't know it's a necromancer. And when he takes the ghost, the dead man off the gallows, the ghost of the dead man comes alive and asks him a series of riddles under the threat of, if he doesn't answer it correctly, his head will explode. But every time he answers it correctly, the dead man's ghost jumps back into the tree where he was before. And the king has to do this many, many times until finally he wins over the ghost through his perseverance and honesty. And then the ghost tells him how to kill the necromancer. All right. I always like to say I'm a yoga teacher, not a posture teacher. And the importance of studying with someone is not to just stand on their shoulders and see further than them, but to actually see from a different angle. As my teacher often says, yoga teaches you to cure what need not be endured and endure what cannot be cured. So that's something that keeps you going through the length of the path. Of course, it's not over in a day. You got to make this a lifetime study. Love this quote by Rumi. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose as an animal. I died as an animal and I was a man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? So each one of us has to fight this internal battle of letting go of the idea of going further. Why should I go further? Can't I stay where I am? Yeah, well, as he says, when were we dying? When were we less by dying? So that brings us to understanding that we have to step out of our own tradition to see clearly. My old psychedelic gurus, Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, right? Turn on, tune in, drop out. But the dropping out has to do with dropping out of unloving roles. You still may be involved in a society, though some people too do drop out completely and try to go off the grid. But in general, it has to be no longer reinforcing the persona and the way that you're tied to your social identity. Now, that brings us to the problem of whether or not we dance with it all in a tantric way and embrace the material plane, or we renounce it and we see the falsity of the imagination and the intricacies of the follies of the material plane, how it gets involved in stuff that in certain ways are petty and beneath us, and yet all of history has created a nightmare about that stuff. And so that's the balance we have to strike. Inwardly be detached, even though externally we're working in society, rather than just be a hedonist and lose the sense of detachment, or completely renounce everything and be devoid of human contact. But what happens is we evolve these psychic modalities, right? I love this quote from Yoshiba, the founder of Aikido. The art of peace is medicine for a sick world. There is evil and disorder in the world because people have forgotten that all things emanate from one source. Return to that source and leave behind all self-centered thoughts, petty desires, and anger. Those who are possessed by nothing possess everything. Well, we have to evolve this understanding because most of us are so overlearned that we don't realize that we're sick, and that most of the politics, business, and medicine that we are involved in are manic pursuits that take us away from what's real. And remember, the best things in life are not things. So if we understand that, then we have to do some serious work on ourselves. And I love this image of the sweat lodge. My experience in men's work asks you a little simple question. when you come in to deal with this purification, are you coming on or off burden? If you're coming on burden, that means you're really coming to heal yourself. But if you're coming off burden, then you're ready to serve. You have to decide at any given moment, do you need to be healed, or are you far enough along that you can just start serving people? And then you have to get in touch with this feeling of inferiority and superiority, an Adlerian term. I love this. I have an inferiority complex about my superiority complex. I know I'm better than you, but I really feel horrible about myself for letting you know. You know, they say behind every inferiority complex is a superiority complex. Behind every superiority complex is an inferiority complex. So once you get that together, then you begin to wrestle with your shadow. It's as if the soul grows through its own pathology. Although, of course, a lot of us would not like to think that our growth lies there. We think we should be in another direction. And it's true, there's growth in other directions as well, but there's so much more in the dark than in the light. So can we find ecstasy in life? The mere sense of living is joy enough, but not if the shadow is there. So you got to do this work. If you do this work, you learn to flaunt your own eccentricities. Rather than a theory of ideas, it's a theory of eccentricities. I love this. Well, dear, if you must roam about the house dressed as a chicken, that's fine. But please close the drapes when you do. Yeah, so fly under the radar. Nobody else has to know. And then be aware of your station in life. Right? Here's me in India in 87. So I learned that there's not only a psychology of introversion, but a psychology of extroversion. If we would re-enchant the world, we have to bring our spirit. We have to realize we may be connected to lineage, but if it's a living tradition, that's different than just practicing ancient techniques. There's no magic in it except what a person brings to it in their contemporary generation. And then this is an interesting that I learned from class. So many times, the whole class seems to be failing to do exactly what the teacher told you to do. And so how can you have santosha or contentment when the truth is that all the way along, I didn't do it well and I wasn't happy with it. But the key is, did you give it your best shot? If you gave it your best shot and only you know what is the one that has all your juice behind it, and then if you gave it your best shot, even if you didn't do whatever the teacher said, you leave the class afterwards feeling content, having given it your best, and that becomes a benchmark for how you want to live the rest of your life. So remember, he who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader. So we have to learn equally to shine in front or to be a step from behind and serve and humble yourself. And our whole life is going to give us ample opportunities to do that. So remember, to build a lasting relationship with somebody else, you see it says cut on the dotted line and rotate, so me becomes we. Yeah, and that's the key. That's the key to hand to other people, thinking about them, right? There's no I in the team word, in the word team. So this gives you a certain kind of gravitas, right? You're not so ego-centered. But the soberness doesn't mean you're lacking in playfulness. No, it just means your head is screwed on straight.